CEO of Vodafone UK. The question is, why am I here tonight when I'm talking about business? So, over the last couple of months, we did a number of presentations to the Cabinet on the way that the business is changing in the UK. Not just as a result of the recession, but just because of a number of other factors. And Ed Vasey was one of those people that was at the presentations that we did. He said he thought it was very important that business understood, because often they spend their whole time focusing on their business, they understood how the nature of business was changing, especially with the advent of new technologies. And so I'm going to talk you through a little bit about what's happening as we see it from our position, and then give you the chance to ask questions afterwards. So we, Vodafone, I hope you've heard of us. we started this game nearly 29 years ago. Vodafone originally set out to just get 1 million customers in the UK. We now have 20 million customers in the UK. Interestingly, we actually have 413 million customers worldwide. But one of the interesting things is when we set up the company is we really believed that businesses were going to be the mainstay of our business. And therefore we've always had more of a business orientation than perhaps consumer orientation. Today 4 out of 10 businesses in the UK use us, and therefore we see a lot of data and information about how they use phones and what's happening. 7 years ago we set up a research team to actually look at how people were using mobile phones for business, and also what was affecting their businesses and why they were changing the way that they worked. And we set that research team up actually in the Netherlands, and then we spread the research out to 16 countries. I'm going to take you through a little bit about what we found, because there is a huge change in the workplace happening, and it's going to fundamentally change the way that everybody works as time goes on. So, first of all, what factors are affecting companies and the way they work? Obviously, the first one is the recession. It affects us in a number of different ways. It affects us that our customers want more value for money. Same for you. It affects people that they have to cost cut, and yet certainly their costs are going up like energy, whether they like it or not. So basically the composition of costs in most companies are being morphed in one direction or another, but it's usually not in the right direction. The second interesting change is actually the nature of customers, not just my customers, but your customers as well, is that actually they're becoming more demanding. So the average number of contacts a customer makes into a company, whether it's business to business or business to consumer, is rising dramatically. In the old days, people would purchase goods and go away, and then they come back after a certain interval and do the same again, hopefully. And actually now, customers are having more of a continuous relationship with brands and are actually contacting customers continuously. I get 500,000 calls into my call centre every week, and it's not necessarily because there's something wrong with the phone or with their bill, but actually because they just want to explore using it more, and therefore their thirst for knowledge means that they contact me more often. So you've got a situation for a lot of businesses where you've got customers who are actually contacting the business more often. And secondly, you've got this dichotomy or problem where you've got costs which want to rise, where actually you need to keep down because your own ability to put up prices is constrained because of the recession. Then you add to that a couple of other things that are affecting businesses. The first one being a generational change, and that is that the type of person coming into the workplace is also changing as well. So you've got these external factors being cost and customers, and internally you've got a change in workforce. Now most of us, looking around the room, I think are probably Generation X. Generation X is the people who were born somewhere around between 1961 and 1982. There's a couple of baby boomers here as well, I see, that are slightly older, but I won't embarrass you by making you put your hand up. But the interesting thing is actually not so much the baby boomers or Gen X, it's actually Generation Y. Generation Y, the generation that were born after 1982. And the reason that they're an interesting generation is twofold. First of all, within 4 years, they will dominate the workplace. So currently, Gen X is the main constituent of most companies. Gen Y will be the main constituent within 4 years. And the second reason why they're interesting is because they're the first generation that come to work pretty much fully equipped from a technological point of view. So when Gen X came to work, on average only 12 people could touch type. When Gen Y come to work, 97% of them can type in one form or another. Gen Y can also use a computer, an advanced computer, they can use webcams, they can use instant messaging, they can use email, they can use Microsoft, and so on and so forth, even before they get into their first job, which is a startling fact because when I started work, the first thing I had to do on my first day was learn to use a telex machine. So this generation comes in with incredibly high expectations of, knowledge of how to use technology. And secondly, they expect that technology to be available to them. And we actually measure in companies, not just my own company, but other companies, what we call the employer net promoter score. What that is how happy the employee is when they start work. And the interesting thing with Gen Y people is that when they start work, they're incredibly excited until about week 6, and it falls off a cliff. And the reason it falls off a cliff is, first of all, they realise that this is the rest of their life. And secondly, more importantly, they realise that the technology that a lot of you are providing in terms of employers is actually inferior to the technology they have at home. And that affects actually their attitude towards work and you as an employer. So Gen Y, who started as a small part of the workforce in most companies, will actually dominate in a few years. And actually what we're finding now as this generation is coming into the workforce is that actually they're only prepared to stay with employers who actually provide them with technology that they are equipped to use. And since they're equipped at quite a high level when they start work, they are more prone to leave than stay if they can't get the technology that they feel they need to do their job. And that's the first time it's happened, because as I say, Gen X, when we came in, mainframe computers, telex machines, all these things, you didn't have them at home. You only had them in the office space, and therefore you came in from a deficit point of view, from a technology point of view, not actually a surfeit. The fourth thing that's changing is actually the workplace itself, because the other three things I mentioned of customer demand, cost pressure, and Gen Y is actually forcing a re-evaluation of the workplace. And it's interesting how it is changing. So when the workplace was set up, for instance, the concept of a meeting room was actually created to get away from the noise of factory floors. I don't know how many of you here have factory floors, but a lot of businesses have meeting rooms. And therefore the whole principle of having the office layout, the way it was done, was all based on factory-based rules set up in 1920, not actually for a company that's based in 2013. Lots of companies still have offices. Interestingly, I have 20,000 staff in my company. We don't have any offices. I sit in open plan with my secretary and with everybody else. If I don't get to work early enough in the morning, then my corner desk, which is where the sun comes in, will be nicked by a bunch of graduates, and I have to go and sit somewhere else. We also don't have any meeting rooms, interestingly. We have big coffee shops where people can go, and in fact, if you're having a meeting of less than 6 people, we don't even allow you to book a meeting room. So you have to sit in the coffee shops, and we have 5 large coffee shops in Newbury, for instance, that each seat 1,000 people, and that's where most people do their business all day. A lot of the way that businesses were set up and run and the way that offices were laid out was down to the fact that in the 1920s, 1930s, there was actually no communications. Telephones weren't, they had been invented, but they weren't ubiquitous. And therefore, actually, the importance of having people co-located so you could give your instructions to someone was very important. And actually, interestingly, over the next 100 years, as telephones got more and more ubiquitous, and then the mobile came along in the last 30 years, so a lot of companies haven't adapted their businesses, and they still have offices, and they still have this principle of location and being together. And actually, it's a very outdated concept now. So of course we all need to socialise with each other, we all need to be with each other from time to time, but the need to be with each other all the time is actually diminishing rapidly. So what you've got is, you've got 4 things that are kind of coming together and creating this kind of revolution, although it's actually, not obvious it's a revolution, of cost control, customer demand, Gen Y, and also outdated office layout. Interestingly, we altered our campus, as I said, we went totally open plan. We've now done it worldwide, in fact, in all of our countries around the world. And what we found is that our agility in the marketplace has increased significantly, because we've got a lot of young people in the business. They tend to want to move fast. We've facilitated that with excellent technology in terms of a laptop. In my company, you get a PC laptop when you arrive, you get a mobile phone, you get a notebook, and that's it. You don't get anything else. We don't produce any paper, by the way. We've taken 87% of all the paper in the business out, completely out of the business. Everything is done electronically now. And our people, because they work in task groups, they all have bosses and line management they work on tasks, means that they actually are incredibly agile. I guess it begs the question, does it matter? Well, interestingly, when I took over 4 years ago, we were £700 million behind our rival O2 in terms of turnover, and they were also more profitable than us. And we've actually overtaken them completely now. And the only reason we've done it, because we use pretty much the same technology, we both sell iPhones, we both do all these marvellous things, is actually because of our agility. And our agility is so quick to actually make decisions and get stuff done and respond as best we can to customer needs. So this revolution, you might say, okay, you're a big company. You know, big company's fine for you. I don't have 20,000 staff. I don't have a campus. I don't have these things. But interesting, the lessons from what I'm saying today actually permeate pretty much every business in the UK. And I'll give you another example of how it's changing. And this may play more to your business than mine. So the other interesting thing is that in the old days, a lot of people used to be in the office the whole time. They'd have maybe a few sales reps that went out and about. But by and large, most people were office-based. Again, if we look across our whole customer base, and there's always exceptions, these days roughly 25% of the workforce are actually based 100% in the office the whole of the time. They just never go out. So secretarial, admin staff primarily. The next 25% are primarily based in the office, but actually go out from time to time, but on a regular drumbeat. So they might go out once a week, it might be a different day, but they do go out. The other half, the majority, so again divided into two groups. The first group are out most of the time, but come into the office maybe once or twice a week. It might be a sales rep or something like this, and they have to file their admin or whatever. And then the last group, 25%, never touch the office. So they might be into the office once a month or once every 2 weeks. So we've gone from a situation where roughly 75% of people were in the office 5 days a week, to where 75% of the office are actually, of the employees are actually out of the office. And that's happened in one generation. Why has it happened? Well, it's happened because people need to be closer to their customers, they need to be more agile, they need to be out and about, and therefore they're on the move more, and therefore they need to get out of the office. And of course that helps me, because then they need a mobile phone, or they need the internet for their PC, and they're enabled by that to get out and about. And it's really changing not just big businesses, but small businesses. And I was trying to think of a customer that I could give you an example of. So I rang a customer this morning and asked him if I could quote him. So we have a customer in Milton Keynes, and he does double glazing for houses, residential houses. Very interesting model. There's him, there's his wife, who is in the small industrial estate on Milton Keynes. She looks after the depot, and they have a couple of Polish lads that kind of help them out with installations and so on and so forth. So it's basically a family business with two full-time staff. And what he does is he places, a lot of people when they're buying double glazing, they like to contact a local company, and they actually still look in Yellow Pages. It amazes me that anyone looks in Yellow Pages, but anyway, they still look in Yellow Pages, and they like to call a landline number, not a mobile number, because they think a mobile number somehow might be a bit of a fly-by-night, whereas if it's a landline number, it's going to be somebody who's definitely more professional. So, and he actually services not just Milton Keynes, he goes to Nottingham, he goes to Leeds, he goes all over the place. So he has 5 towns where he has a landline number in Yellow Pages. And it worked fine. You called the landline, they routed 5 lots of landlines, BT, through to their little industrial depot. His wife answered the phone, she then made appointments, he called in from his mobile, he would then go and take the appointments, give quotes, hopefully get the business going, and sort of was 2 Polish lads. Life was very, very sweet. Until she had twins. At that point, it was a slight problem, because apparently it's very difficult to sit in an office all day with 2 twins. I've never tried it. But you have twins.
Yeah. I can testify.
So at which point she needed to stay at home. And that gave him a problem, because he first of all tried one of the Polish lads in the office, but their English wasn't good enough, so that didn't work. And then he couldn't afford to hire somebody. And therefore he was coming back to an answering machine that was absolutely stuffed full of messages. And when he called those people back, he found that they'd already moved on to the next company, because they couldn't connect. In fact, we know from our own research that when somebody calls a company, if they don't get a call back within 2 hours, 70% of them will never call again. So therefore he was left with a big problem. So actually what happened was he actually bought a service from us. You can buy it from other people, he happened to buy it from us. where basically we put the landline number onto the mobile phone, which means when you call that landline number, it seamlessly routes through to the mobile phone. And when he sees the number actually ringing, he can actually tell which of the 5 cities it came from. So he can answer it Nottingham double glazing, Leeds double glazing, or Milton Keynes double glazing. That means that even if he's up a ladder, and to be fair, he shouldn't be using a mobile phone up a ladder, but he told me he does, then he can actually answer the phone, take the inquiry, schedule when he's going to go and see the customer, and then go and see the customer. And the perverse thing about this story is that since his wife's gone off to look after the twins, his business has actually got bigger. Because what's happened is he's so responsive and agile to the calls coming in, and he's able to optimise exactly when he's going to see the customers. The other thing he does, which is very cute, is he sends them an email straight out of his phone to the customer to confirm the actual appointment time, because then he finds that more of them are actually in, because what he had was frustration where he'd turn up at their front door and they'd gone shopping. Something like, well, by sending them an email, somehow it kind of routes them to the house until he gets there. And as a consequence, his business has got bigger, and now he's got another 2 staff. I'm not sure what ethnicity they are, but so now his company's got bigger. And it's an interesting example of how a small business has actually embraced technology instead of fighting it and saying, I don't want it. They've actually embraced it, and it's actually changed the entire nature of his business and actually made it more successful. So where does this leave us? Well, for some of you in this room, you probably think, well, none of this applies to my business, which is fine. But for any of you that have people or want to grow, I think the importance of embracing technology is incredibly key to your future. And I think that, interestingly, although technology may scare some of you, actually it's becoming a lot simpler to use and a lot simpler to integrate into what you're doing. And it's going to change again, and that's if you like, my last part of what I wanted to tell you about. So mobile networks started 29 years ago. The first thing was a race to get coverage, was to try and basically cover the UK. It sounds incredibly simple. All you do is you stick up one of those ugly masts at the side of motorways, and you basically get coverage and then you're away. What you may not know is underneath that mast is a piece of fibre. There's a fibre cable, and it connects along the road into what's called a hub, and from that it goes to an aggregation point, and eventually it comes back into the core network. And we then, when you actually make a call, your phone connects to the nearest mast. It then takes the call and takes it wherever in the UK or internationally you want. Actually getting permission to put up those masts in the first place is very difficult. Again, I've got another town in the Midlands where I've got 1,000 people who have written a petition saying they don't want a mobile mast in their village, and 1,500 people have formed a petition saying they can't get mobile coverage and it's ridiculous. This country is actually unique in that respect. In all other European countries, actually government have decided it's national infrastructure, and therefore they decide that therefore there will be masts and they do provide coverage. It doesn't work that way in this country, unfortunately. Although recently we've just got a change in the planning rules that gives us at least the benefit of the doubt when it comes to a kind of 50-50 argument. So we started off with 2G, what's called 2G as a technology. We then added a very rough kind of internet access called GPRS, and that was a few years ago. And then 10 years ago, we bought a 3G license. A 3G license, if you think of it as 2G is a very small pipe, 3G is a bigger pipe, and it allows us to do more internet. So we purchased that, cost us £6 billion. I mean, for those of you that, from accounting background, I still pay £800,000 every single day of the week in depreciation for the £6 billion I spent 11 years ago. And I will not have paid off that mortgage on 3G until 2020. Anyway, we put 3G in. Take-up of 3G was actually quite slow, interestingly. So a lot of people, a lot of kids, they got internet phones quite quickly. But actually a lot of people didn't. Then what happened was that the industry invented smartphones, which are a lot more user-friendly, think the iPhone. They came in, and now actually 88% of everything I sell is smartphones. So feature phones, which are the other kind of phone, will actually be pretty much dead in the water within a couple of years. So 3G phones and smartphones have accelerated. And the amount of internet that people consume, which we measure in megabytes, which is a terrible unit, but it's what we measure consumption in, has gone from the early days of about 10 megabytes per month up to a point where, on average, we're using 325 megabytes. In America, they've already got a thing called 4G, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they're already up to a gigabyte of data per month. So that's an individual using their mobile phone to actually consume a whole gigabyte of data. That is hours and hours of streaming, emails, music, you name it, going through an internet connection into a mobile phone. Why don't we have 4G? We don't have 4G because there was a big row between the government, prior to Ed Vaizey, I have to say, the previous government, I have to be very careful here, and the operators about how the auction would be run, because basically it was set up to favour one operator and a lot of other people disagreed. Eventually, Ed Vaizey, to his credit, actually got the rules agreed, and we had the auction just last year, at the start of this year. We paid 800 million, so quite a modest amount of money compared with the 6 billion we paid before. We actually bought the biggest package of spectrum as well. We're now rolling that out, and we'll launch in parts of the country in September, and then it'll roll out to the rest of the UK. That will then enable phones to consume far more internet, so if you've got staff on the road, they'll be able to basically get a very high quality, high speed internet connection from pretty much anywhere in the country. And what we did was, you might say, well, yeah, that's all fine, but I'm still back at the point where I still don't have internet with mobile phones sitting in my house or my office. So what's happening about that? So apart from the planning issues I talked about earlier, what we decided to do was, in order to build out the whole of the country, given it's, after 28 years we still haven't got perfect coverage everywhere, we would actually combine with O2 from a network point of view. What we do is we build one network for the UK, but we put two sets of antennae, which are those things on the top of the mast, on it, so one for them, one for us. Because we believe that therefore we could actually get faster to ubiquitous coverage at a faster rate. So what we've committed to as companies is that we will get to 98% coverage across the landmass of the British Isles by the end of 2015. To give you an idea, 98% may not sound much, but in fact only 98.4% of dwellings have running water in this country, which is probably a fact you didn't know, did you? So we will fill in the not spots, as we call them, over time, and we will actually get to a point where we've got pretty ubiquitous coverage. And the good news is that that won't just be on 2G, the original phone technology, but it'll actually be on 2, 3 and 4. So some villages, and we've just done one in West Berks actually near where we're based, we literally go from nothing to 2, 3 and 4G indoor and outdoor coverage, which totally lights up a village. It's amazing how it transforms it. The other thing is we're piggybacking off some of the work BDU UK is doing in terms of putting broadband into residential areas.